Welcome again, and I'm glad to see that everyone is still active and participating in this a lovely workshop. So we want to give some viewpoints on the previous session on training, and especially to open it up for questions before we do that. And so I know there were a lot of questions in the audience about training earlier before we had the break. So I'm just going to open it up for comments from the audience or questions that that Peter and I will try to address. So yes, please.
Bernadette, FDA. Just to follow up with the opportunity from the last panel, I thought it was very interesting to, as always, hear careers. But the one thing that's surfacing right now is, what's the future? So as we encourage our students to become DVMs and then go on and add masters, PhDs, residencies, they're going to do all that with enthusiasm, as we've seen. But what really is there out there for them for definitively knowing there's a job? For a number of years, a lot of veterinarians were told, no, you need to get an MPH to get a job. And a lot of them did. And in fact, but there isn't a job. And I don't mean just general practice, I mean across the board. In government, what are our criteria? Again, in academia, what are you looking for? But I would love to make sure we don't lose sight of, are we looking ahead, and do we know for sure there is a need and we're going to fill it? The one thing I'm concerned about, as I've talked to a number of folks, is, so I come to you as a faculty member and everybody's saying, but I really want you to put most of your emphasis on in the hospital, dealing with the clients. And this is medical as well as veterinary medicine. And if that's the case, aren't we letting down what we've just brought forward, our superstars that have the capability of getting these grants, doing the research, and advancing our science, if in fact they're being asked, but I need you to put more emphasis on the clinics? So it's a broad question, and I wish we had all the deans of all the colleges here, but it's something to think about so that we don't lose track of that. And I welcome ideas on that one. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bernadette. Sure, please.
Different people can speak, but maybe we can discuss these as we go. Just out of curiosity, how many people here have lobbied or somehow felt frustrated by federal research funding? How many people here have felt the same about state funding? Or done something? The state funding is killing us more than federal funding. So the NIH has drawn the ire of many investigators. Meanwhile, the states, state after state after state, slice support for faculty positions, which makes it very difficult for deans and chairs not to shove people into the clinics instead of following up on their research training. And these states are getting away with murder. And our medical school at UCSD is, for all intents and purposes, a private medical school. Our dean will tell you that our state support is a rounding error. And so I think one of the challenges is that. Now, having said that, the sun will come up in the east, and there will be careers for people who are bright, well-trained, and who apply themselves. But the careers in 5 or 10 or 20 years might be slightly different than what we grew up with and what our first steps were.
Michael.
I just to comment on the future of jobs. I think it's kind of what you went back to, Peter. It's I think there will be jobs in which we do have. I was just looking at our list of recent appointments and faculty hires, and they're marked by people that have had research training and as mentioned here, often are more competitive because of the K award. And it makes it much more attractive, obviously, if you have an applicant which does have a research component to the faculty description that has proven themselves through at least through a K award application. It puts them in a much greater advantage. The problem, of course, is there's not enough of those slots necessarily to have everybody in your pool. But when we're measuring research productivity, I think veterinarians need to understand that they can't say, I'm a veterinarian and so hire me to do research unless they have the research training. So, that's, it seems like an obvious, but if they expect to be hired without some sort of evidence of that, with no research plan, it's going to be hard to compete against PhDs that that come in with a research plan that have the, publication. So they just need to be realistic when they're applying for those jobs. Now, having said that, on the clinical side, I think it is a problem in the clinics when we have hospitals to run and when we have duties to maintain those hospitals. So we're looking for ways to leverage, like the CTSAs. But once they leave the clinic positions or they get freed up time, like Rob was talking about, we need to understand that we have to have other funds to hire staff veterinarians to fill the gap for their clinical duties. And, I think those are the challenges on the administrative side of finding those funds to help offset their absence, essentially, in the clinic. And we're trying to do everything we can through other sources or other mechanisms to stretch the dollars. But you have to have those clinician examples to really stimulate the next generation as well.
Tony, I think you had a question.
Yeah, Tony Goldberg, University of Wisconsin-Madison. Just a quick question for everyone who's participated in the panels. It seems like there's been no discussion of an alternative pathway, which is the one I followed, which is to get your PhD or start to get your DVM after your PhD, which has a distinct advantage that you can be efficient because then you're a PhD VM and you save a letter in the abbreviation. But I was attracted to veterinary medicine because I saw the light late. And it was like, I like to say, it was like a long and painful postdoc, but in the end, I came out ahead. And I wonder if there are, or if not, why there aren't programs that specifically target PhDs to go back to school in veterinary medicine. And recently at Wisconsin, we've had a very small but steady population of those types of people coming in, people with PhDs. I have a promising scholar in my lab right now who got her PhD in biochemistry from Yale and is getting her DVM degree. And it seems like if we were going to increase our One Health workforce, that might be an efficient way. A small financial incentive could attract some people who are sort of on the cusp at that stage of their career. And I wonder if anyone has heard of programs like this targeting that population.
Well, I could just comment on our program at MIT. We've had several fellows who've exactly your track, Tony, is that they got a PhD, they went and in a related field, they went and got a DVM, and then they wanted to come back into research with more of a veterinary track or emphasis. So I think I would agree with you that there are those individuals out there. We certainly should energize ourselves to go after those people. Yes, please, Scott.
Scott Mischler, Pfizer. So over the past 4 or 5 years within Pfizer, we've had at least 3 that I can remember research positions open within comparative medicine for DVM PhDs, not needing to be board certified, just DVM PhDs. And we struggled to find even candidates to apply. And I think one of the challenges is how do we get sort of the word out, a list of, candidates that will be eligible or places to advertise. Of course, big Pfizer, we expect people to go to our website and find these jobs. And I think that that's maybe a connection that we're missing here. I can't speak for the other pharma, but certainly in Pfizer, that's an area that we struggle. If we're looking for a boarded veterinarian, certainly we'll go to the board associations or we'll go through some of the board association journals. But to find a DVM PhD to do research, it's hard to find those individuals.
Just on a related theme, before Sue was at some meeting somewhere talking to an engineer with SpaceX, and she was saying it was the dream of all kinds of people in her engineering school to go to vet school. So I think that's another missed market of talent in biomedical research that's out there. The engineers who, how many people have ever intersected with them as undergrads? I just don't think it happens to be a great. Sue, you had a.
Yeah, I don't know if you've addressed the last question yet, so I don't know if I should dive into mine. But I was also wondering, what's the current thinking or breadth of thought on whether or not a PhD is absolutely required if you have instead a research fellowship opportunity like many of the MD colleagues might have in lieu of PhD.
Go ahead, Pete.
I think I expressed my opinions on that yesterday, probably to the chagrin of some people. But if you have a good track, I don't think the PhD is necessary. So maybe insisting on the DVM PhD limits the opportunity. It depends why you want that, I suppose. So if you're wanting them to lead a research program, you wouldn't ask an MD to have a PhD. If you want it for some other reason, you'd have to sort of know what the goal was there.
But as you know, Sue, on the workforce, the MD is perfectly acceptable and very competitive in terms of getting research dollars.
I think, though, that many of those non-PhD MDs would have some research fellowship training or some equivalent, which I'm not that understanding of, but maybe that would be useful for us to look at to see what that alternative would be that maybe wouldn't be as time-consuming, but just as effective.
No, I think the model is there, and we should learn more about it, because
part of that model is on the admissions. A lot of these MD applicants have a research background and a paper, so right away, whenever they go for a K award, they're going to have one or two more papers from their pre-medical days. The second thing is residencies. As undergrads, actually, there's often, my son was complaining he had to finish a paper for something, I have no idea what for. So some of the medical schools do get them involved and require involvement in research. The third thing, residencies generally don't provide them any research opportunities, but fellowships do. And so they're blending, they're being a clinician scientist, they might be 90% clinician for 1 or 2 years of their fellowship, and the ratios might flip where there may be only 10 or 20% clinician for 2 more years. So they actually get, introduced in bits of it in drabs and then a focus block so that they end up in a pretty good place. So they're bright, but so are our vet trainees. And so I don't see why, we would make the PhD mandatory necessarily. However, the other flip side is if you're already doing 2 or 3, 4 years of research, why not get the letters? But, yep.
I just wanted to add to that. So Robert Bean from UC Davis, I think in me seeing and being in a lab where fellows came through, one of the things that I would add to that is, and I've said to a couple of my trainees, is that if you are very productive during a fellowship, then it probably may be equivalent. And if you come out with 2 or 3 high impact papers through that puts you potentially at the equivalent of a PhD. So my thought is that it doesn't really, the PhD isn't completely necessary, but you can't just go to any lab in a veterinary school and do a fellowship and expect that to be equivalent to doing a fellowship in perhaps a big, high-impact, well-funded lab. And there certainly are those within vet schools, but there are many of those, they're few and far between.
Deborah.
I think there would also need to be a cultural shift at the level of veterinary school hiring.
Right.
That if you have 2 equal candidates and one's got a PhD, then you're going to feel compelled to take that one, whether that's rational or not, and that would just need to shift.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Who had a question? Someone? Did we miss someone? Yes, up there.
Excuse
Thank
me,
you.
Kelly Metcalf-Pate, Johns Hopkins. I also wanted to comment on this line of conversation. And as a disclaimer, I am a DVM PhD. But I think it's very important that we remember that there's certain components of the training program that have to be inherent in these fellowships. And I think that's part of the reason why so many of these programs do end up with them getting a PhD, because that structure is already there. That training in the grantsmanship, that training in how to write a good publication, that training in simply how to design a sound study. So I think that's part of the reason why we do default to the PhD so much. Do we need them? Probably not, but we do need that training in addition to the productivity in these fellowships.
Great. Yes, please.
I would also like to encourage folks that have residency training programs to really consider having those residents at least do a master's degree, and also consider taking residents who have been in practice. I would have to say that the top 2 residents that I've ever had in my career both went on and got PhDs, and had come out of private practice. One of them was in private practice for 9 years, and a lot of people wouldn't even look at him because of that. But I think having that experience, when they come back, they've got a different perspective that's, I think, sometimes useful. They know what they want to do at that point. And had we not had a residency program where we made them at least get a master's so that they got that exposure, I don't think either one of them would have been the least bit interested in research, because especially veterinarians like Rob and like myself that sat on the back row and never thought we would do anything related to this. I think a lot of it is either you're intimidated because research sounds kind of scary, or it doesn't sound like it's fun. And so sometimes it takes getting them in that situation to see that, one, it's not so scary, and two, it can be fun.
Right.
Can I just ask Carolyn a question about that? So Philippe Benoit from Cornell, keeping it in the one world, one health concept, I think veterinary clinical studies are extremely important. And so what do you pay residents to do that kind of research? Because I was recently stunned to hear that our university, our veterinary college, together with UC Davis, are the highest paying for residencies, and they don't come even near what an NIH awardee gets. We know we have an R25. R25 no longer exists for our lab animal medicine, but we pay them that kind of rate.
Right.
So we're in the high 40s, and these, I think we pay like 31, 32.
Yeah,
I mean, that's a shame. I mean,
we're actually towards the bottom of that. I'm probably the wrong person to ask, because I really, really wanted to do a residency, so I did an unpaid residency at Auburn. They had to give me $1 a month so I could get a parking pass, and they took taxes out of that, so I actually still have my checks that say I made 88 cents in a month.
Right, but you see, that's the problem. And I think when you know, it's such a pleasure to work with Rod Page on the oncology and the translation, but we're not giving, there's no venue here. I mean, there's no real incentive. I mean, you got to be a martyr to one.
Yeah, I mean, I think the incentive is going to be when these numbers come out on return on investment. I mean, when people become aware of what you have to do in private practice to return on that, I mean, you're going to be seeing people looking at these other careers, I think. And I think that's going to shift, hopefully, the curriculum to the fact that we can create those types of products when they finish their training.
Yes, Carol.
Barb Fuller, I'm with Elanco. I have to admit I have a DVM and no PhD. I did 18 years of research at Mass General Hospital in Human Health, and decided at that point I wanted to fulfill my life and become a veterinarian when Tufts opened a veterinary school. They did not have a PhD program. UPenn did. They had 2 slots. I applied for it, but clearly didn't get in. I have done 2 postdocs, one of which was at Harvard doing AIDS lymphoma research. Having only a DVM has limited my career. I've had a great career. I do research. I love it, but it has limited my ability to advance.
That point was raised that the culture has to change, and maybe the culture has to change before the rules change, because you're absolutely right, and it's wrong.
Carole Robertson. Oh,
Yeah, there's two questions there.
I was just going to, I can just.
I just wanted to make a quick point that I think it hasn't been brought up, which is that one of the challenges that we face as veterinarians doing translational research in the clinical realm is the lack of acceptance by the extramural NIH regarding alternative models. And, I have a number of colleagues that are doing what I would consider cutting-edge research in non-mouse and zebrafish models that are completely disregarded by study sections because there's no expertise on those study sections that can explain those models. And so they get triaged, and the value of these models is tremendous. And so we certainly can't completely shift the way study sections work, but I think we need to get more veterinarians on study sections so that there's at least some representation during that discussion. And it's a huge problem. And when you talk about trying to really accomplish or really accomplish big things within the framework of One Health and translational models. The models, all of them are valuable. Nobody's discounting mouse models, but everything that we do is valuable, and the extramural NIH needs to see that.
Yeah, that's actually one of our recommendations on the manpower study, is that more veterinarians are engaged in the study section process and become true players in that so that these models are not just ignored.
I just wanted to comment briefly about this cultural issue, One Health coming together, recognizing veterinarians. With my DVM only, having been in practice for 15 years, I ended up being the CEO of a small medical device startup doing clinical research in people and in animals. And I did that for 4 years. And at the end of that, I decided that I needed more letters after my name just so that the medical community would feel more at ease. I could go toe-to-toe with physicians anytime. Never, from a knowledge perspective, I was in great shape, but I could hand over my card and people would just wrinkle their noses. So I had a great time, went back, got my MPH. That's all it took. Got an MPH from a medical school, UC Davis, in their early years of doing that. And that's kind of been the entree, that's been the ticket. But again, the fact that people didn't acknowledge and recognize based on my track record, I had to work much, much harder for entree until I had the MPH, and then they were good.
Right.
Michael, you were engaged earlier.
I was going to offer Carole a job because,
Double her salary.
but
$2 a month.
one thing I think for veterinary students, and I'll say this to as a general comment, but they need to see us as mentors and see that excitement that we have. So when we teach in the classroom, when we're exposing veterinary students to show them that there are alternative careers and it's not stuck behind a laboratory bench, but it's exciting, it's global, it's all of those things. So all of us have a role in exciting that. I'm sure most people in the audience would do that. So that generally is our role models begin with sometimes the classroom as well. So that's an early opportunity. The other thing I would say about the residents receiving master's degree, unfortunately, in our system at California, for reasons unclear to me, they separate out residencies from graduate, and they won't allow a resident to be in a graduate program. So there's rules at a system level that are campus-wide that we're not allowed to do that. So they're house officers. But having said that, they all do research projects. They're not necessarily at the level of what we would all see as hypothesis-driven research, but they're all exposed to research, and then we try to facilitate their entry into further training, postdoctoral, PhD training, with set-aside funds that transition that are from non-NIH funds, but other funds as well.
Please.
Carole Robertson Plew with Lilly. I have a DVM, and that is the end of my formal, other than the School of Hard Knocks where I got a PhD. That's the extent of the letters after my name officially. It would have improved my chances of moving forward in industry had I had a residency or a PhD behind that DVM or after that DVM. It becomes a calling card. It becomes people look at what you have and what you have done. At this point in my career, it's not going to make a difference. I'm not going back to get my PhD, I'm afraid. But earlier on in my career, I think it would have made a difference. And I think for incoming veterinarians, particularly if you're moving into the human health world, it does help to show that you have done further study. We still have room to grow. We've got to demonstrate to our medical colleagues that we are value-added people, we are value-added expertise. And in some institutions, I think it's well demonstrated. I think what has been experienced at UCSD, and I've seen other veterinarians at UCSD that are making a huge difference. But where we are integrated into the medical community and still a minority, which I am at Lilly, we are still underappreciated as to how much we have to offer as well on a translational comparative basis, but even on just the ability of thinking comparatively, thinking creatively, and moving medical research forward.
Yes, Velma.
Yes, thank you. Vilma Yuzbashan-Gurkhan from Michigan State University. And I would like to make a couple of points. One, with regard to what Cheryl said in being represented at study sections. With the AAVMC and the research committee, we have been very active in interfacing with different institutes and the leadership at NIH to make note of the veterinarians in their study sections. But I think I would also like to put out a call to all of you to volunteer. There's a site you can volunteer to be a reviewer at NIH. You can also please make sure that you say yes when you're called to serve as a reviewer, or if you can't, contact those contacting you to say, here, I cannot at this time, but here are some wonderful colleagues who will do a great job. So I think that's it goes both ways, and every time that we hear that somebody was offered to be on a study section or invited and they turned it down, it's like a big loss for the community. So we don't want to see that happen for sure. Another thing I want to state is that I think many of us have different structures for residency training, and at Michigan State we do allow our residents to pursue masters. The funding for that has been challenging, but I'm working very hard to make that possible. We also allow them to do rotations, if you will, in laboratories to be able to have a substantive research experience and a publication. So I want to also go back, since I didn't have a chance to comment before, on our trainee pipeline. At Michigan State, we have a very robust summer research program, and it has become a feeder into our year-long. We have a year-long T32, and it's in our 13th, I think going on our 14th year. And we have seen a culture shift in terms of the students who can engage and take a year off from their cohort. And I think it's not because of our preaching, but rather seeing the success of their peers, you know, their 1 or 2 year, their seniors, what experiences they talk about that has enabled them. We also have an umbrella graduate program, comparative medicine and integrative biology, that provides that cohort. We now have 48 students in the program. It's both masters and PhD, mostly PhD. But a lot of the DVM students that take the year off are master's students. And then among those who are motivated and are successful, we encourage them to do PhDs, and many have followed that, some at our institution, some at other institutions, and we all count that as of course, great outcomes. So I would be very encouraging. I think the culture is changing, and a lot of our students in the pathology clubs and the One Health clubs, even those interested in small animal practice, they do value research and have research experiences. We have about 32 veterinary students in the summer research program. We also couple that with undergraduates who are interested in veterinary medicine or biomedical sciences, and we have a 40-plus strong cohort in our summer research program, and we even encourage them to think about a longer career path and expose them to all of these options that we've been talking about today. But I would also like to say we have to be in conversations with our admissions officers and offices and really look at the recruiting that we're doing. What is the message that we're sending? And I am very pleased to see a really strong interest in research, but it depends a lot from class to class. But we now have a policy that we highlight our research programs when we are recruiting students. And when we go on campus and talk and we give lectures and undergraduate courses across campus, we talk about the research that's going on in the college. And I think that's another very important step. It's very hard to change minds after they're in. The earlier we plant the seeds, the better returns we're going to get. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Velma. Those are very helpful comments, and certainly I echo many of the things that you've said in terms of assuring that we have future generation of veterinarians interested in biomedical research. Yes, please, Charlie.
So thank you, Charles V., University of Pennsylvania. I have a very specific question, one that it goes back to the question of what the future can offer those who get a PhD. It has to do with large animal veterinarians. At our institution, we have a number of people who are large animal medicine specialists. They have PhDs. Extraordinarily difficult for them to get any funding. Extraordinarily difficult for them to then survive in an institution that requires funding support of salary. I guess looking forward into the future, which was brought up before, of what veterinary scientists can expect once they have their PhD, I'm wondering, and we haven't heard much on large animal, even though that's certainly a big part of One Health, outside of government work and specific fields, is there any way that we can increase the One Health motive into academics in large animal or food animal production?
Well, that's certainly a valid question, but one that I can't answer, but I'd certainly defer to my colleagues in veterinary school about that very question. Michael?
Yeah, just to follow up, where that really works also is global. Because when we go to, developing countries, and you think of the value of a small ruminant that makes a difference in whether a woman gets an education or not, it becomes very quickly apparent what you're there for. So I think that sells really well with students that are especially on the international side. But as mentioned, I think the jobs available through APHIS and ARS and global security and we need to talk about that demand for veterinarians to enter that workforce, because very often the AVMA has a dominant small animal voice that is crying out about 12% under capacity or over capacity or whatever that means. And yet we hear about the need for veterinarians in those areas. And I think we need to be champions of that area as well.
The age-old problem of funding large animal research is, it's always been there, and the current strategy today is largely to encourage people to take their research to something that is relevant to humans that you could launder through the NIH, if I could use that term. And the problem is, if you're an equine specialist, there aren't too many mouse models that are relevant to equine, I would think. That's, you know what I mean? So it's a real challenge, and I don't know what the answers are, if anyone has other foundations or...
The only comment I'll bring up would be the other side of One Health, which has to do with public health, food production, those type of things, which is much different from the translational side, which I think still has a lot of potential, but the funding mechanisms can still be difficult.
So I know AABMC has been involved somewhat in this issue. Ted, do you want to comment?
So I'm going to say, Sue was raising her hand specifically to that question, and maybe I'll let her go first.
I'm sorry, Sue, I didn't see you raise your hand.
No, it's okay. I was just going to mention that part of this issue, I think, is amplified because USDA's research funding for that's discretionary is such a small amount compared to PHS and other available areas. And one of the visits AVMC organized recently, we got to go to NIAID and talk to some of the intramural people, and there's going to be a lot of money potentially coming to NIH for antimicrobial resistance, and I don't know if there's anything we can do as a community to try to convince them that some of that should be used to fund some of those issues relating to the food production and livestock, to look at the instead of just making the assumption that that's where a lot of the problem is coming from, to actually fund some research to figure that out. But and then also, USDA tries to do what it can to provide those resources, but they just haven't been able to fund more because of the growth or the restrictions for the budget.
Ted, did you want to add to that?
I'll second what Sue had said. That's what I probably would have conveyed. But from an organizational standpoint, in terms of the food animal sector of our activities, in terms of education and research, the internal advocacy for that among our membership is smaller than I think it was historically, based on the commodities groups that had indicated less of a need for that sector of growth. So I think, it's being responsive to what our members are saying, and that's not been an area. So sorry I can't address that one specifically. I do want to talk about, switch focus a little bit on a topic, and it's this. We all see in this room the value of diversity, VMD, DVM, PhD, MD. With regard to ethnicity and race, I think the research committee needs to reflect the demographic of the society we serve. And so that's something that we haven't brought up. And here's where I'll tell you, veterinary medicine is number one on a list. According to U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, veterinarians are the least diverse profession. Are you familiar with that concept? So raise your hand if you saw the Atlantic Monthly in 2014 that said the title was 33 Whitest Professions in the U.S. Raise your hand if you read that article. So the number is small, but that's from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So I'm just going to say that one opportunity potentially is being number one on a list is a positive potential for funding. And there are avenues for NSF and other types of research training programs that specifically want to address that issue. So that's something I put forward.
Yeah, there's obviously minority supplements, and certainly in my introductory comments this morning, diversity is a very important topic for NIH funding. So it's front and center in terms of our recruitment efforts to keep that in mind. So I would echo those comments.
But if I could just I was just talking to Manuel about this, and the problem is not all institutes offer those minority supplements, for example, in T32s or R25s. So, and I've put in minority supplements on U grants and not gotten them. So all of the institutes are tight in their funding and don't necessarily, can't fund all.
The other mechanism, NSF advanced grants as well, and we've been able to hire Latina faculty members who were very, very competitive, and the advantage of those kind of advanced grants is, and I think several institutions have those, is they offer a tremendous support once we recruit from those demographics, which has been really very, very helpful. And I would echo Ted's comments. If you're doing early recruitment and go into a junior high and ask the students who's interested in science, you'll get about 40 out of 45 hands raised. But if you say something about, well, as a veterinarian, the pathway to get there, they look at you puzzled. So, early recruitment into those populations is really important, and to show that the veterinary degree is a biomedical advantage.
Yes, please.
Hi, Katie Sheets, NC State. So on the same subject, one of the questions that the trainees were asked that I didn't get to comment on when we were on the panel was provide advice to the NIH regarding ways to improve interdisciplinary training programs. So on the same subject, something I'm very interested in is communication. And so I've participated in some institutes just because I was interested on diversity training and on collaborations with community partners. And it's sort of that whole, I didn't know what I didn't know. And so I've learned a lot from that just on how to work in collaborations, how to establish outcomes, work on mutual expectations, conflict resolution at the beginning of collaborative teams, how that's going to be negotiated. So all of that I feel like I've really benefited from when I look forward to, what will I bring to an interdisciplinary team? And so those are some training opportunities that I think are really important.
Yes, Bernadette.
Just another comment in general, as we are here for One Health. I've been thoroughly impressed with the wonderful opportunities the universities avail the students with externships that allows them to travel to so many different areas and get a glimpse as to alternatives that they can do upon graduation. I think that's highlighted. And that gets back again to how do we continue to tell and showcase the wonderful advances in medicine that we've brought forward, which ties back into the education of the public and also to our students year one all the way through, which will encourage them to embark upon hopefully a future that does lead to what we're seeking, getting your foot in the door with research and what you can do. And I think many times we don't share those stories enough. And even in private practice, we can be sharing those stories immediately with our clients coming in the clinic door as to how we've advanced not only the health for their animals, but for them. Thanks.
Great.
I just had a comment, if I may, which you might be able to address with your question as well.
Yes.
But we're going to have two more. Mine's not a question. I'm on the board, or chair here. So this whole issue of PhDs and training, you can't forget tuition costs to a PI. And in the University of Virginia, once somebody went into candidacy, there was an administrative fee of a couple $100, but in California, you pay the full shot. It's $10,000 or so a year on top of their salary. And nobody's there to pay for that. And so we're either not going to train them or there's other problems. The $1 residents, boy, are they rare. This is a profession that increasingly has a lot of women. And I think if we should be very careful about volunteerism and discounted training programs, because it's so easy for people to fall into the let's take them and pay them less than we would pay men or whatever. And I think it's a slippery slope. So separating enthusiasm and passion from fairness, I think we have to be fair, and it's the obligation of the institutions to find the money somehow.
Francisca.
I definitely can't address that. That's outside my bailiwick. But something came to mind when Julie sat on the panel, and which was mentioned right now again, and that has to do with piquing the interest of students early in the sciences in veterinary medicine. So along those lines, I'm going to challenge the audience who knows about CEPA awards or Science Education Partnership Awards. Very few. That's now a program that resides within ORIP. That's a new thing. So it's a partner program. It's a parallel program to like the Division of Comparative Medicine. It used to be in NCRR, and it allows investigators to set up programs for elementary or middle or high school students to engage them in programs that look into sciences. And there are actually two programs that I'm aware of. Maybe there are more, but I'm not the expert. Tony Beck is the expert, so you can contact him. They are linked to veterinary school. One is at UPenn and one is at Purdue, and the other one is at Texas A&M. So don't we have a Texas A&M person here? Yeah. So are you familiar with the program? No. Okay. So what is it called, like coughing dogs and wheezing horses or something like that? So one is called the. Oh, okay, somebody knows better than me. And the other one is like the black bag, the veterinary. So I think the concept to draw young students early into this idea, into these concepts, and whether you actually pick them up or they say like not for me, I think either one is equally important, but these programs allow you to do this. So if you are interested, look into that.
So we're going to close that, but I must emphasize this slide that I've been wanting to show you about mentorship, and we've heard that repeatedly in our discussions of the last 2 days. So again, this was taken from our earlier workshop that we had at NIH a number of years ago, and Darrell Buss, the dean at Wisconsin, we wrote a paper on this, and I'd just like to quote this to you. Brilliant mentor with a great sense of humor will undoubtedly be more inspiring than a brilliant mentor who won't crack a smile and works 18 hours a day. So hopefully you're in that category. All right, so with that, we're going to turn it over to the next group for summary and discussion.
Yeah. So the